Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today at this special event, special Earth Day event on nature-based solutions organized by Harvard Alumni for Climate and the Environment. It's my pleasure to welcome today Brenden, Jongman from the World Bank, Swapan Mehra from Iora Ecological Solutions, and Ingrid Coetzee, who will join us soon from ICLEI, who are three experts on nature-based solutions to share their experience on this very important topic. I'm Marianne Mensah, and I'm a Harvard Kennedy School alumni, and I will be moderating this panel discussion today. I would like first to ask you to keep your questions and answers after the presentation of the presenters. And we will also have a 30 minutes networking session at the end of the presentation and the panel discussion. So stay with us to also get to know each other better. Okay, so nature-based solutions. The last IPCC reports emphasize actually the importance of concerted global action on climate and recognize the importance of nature-based solutions in addressing challenges in climate mitigation and climate adaptation. To better understand what we mean by nature-based solutions, we can always refer to the definition adopted by the UN Environment Assembly in March 22, which says that nature-based solutions or actions to protect, conserve, restore, sustainably use and manage natural or modified terrestrial, freshwater, coastal and marine ecosystems, which address social, economic, and environmental challenges effectively and adaptively, while simultaneously providing human well-being, ecosystem services, and resilience and biodiversity benefits. It's a quite long definition that has been adopted by all countries at this UN Environment Assembly. But to share experience of NBS projects today, we have three experts joining from three different regions and institutions. Brenden Jongman leads the World Bank Global Program on Nature-Based Solutions. He is a climate adaptation and disaster risk management specialist at the World Bank. He is also a researcher on climate change adaptation, flood risk management, and risk financing with over 40 reviewed publications. Ingrid Coetzee, she's a director of Biodiversity, Nature, and Health at ICLEI Africa, and she leads the Biodiversity, Nature-Based Solutions and Health work in ICLEI Cities Biodiversity Center. She has more than 30 years experience in sustainability and governance. Swapan Mehra, he is a Harvard Kennedy School alum, and he's the founder of the Iora Ecological Solutions, a leading environmental firm in India that enables climate action through nature-based solutions. He is also an environmental, finance, and climate policy expert with over 16 years of experience in developing climate change mitigation and adaptation solutions. He has contributed to many climate policy documents for the Indian government. So we are delighted to welcome them, and we thank them for being here with us today to share experiences on nature-based solutions. And I will ask first Brenden Jongman to introduce the World Bank approach on nature-based solutions. Thank you, Brenden.
Thank you very much, Marianne. Can you hear me well and see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah, great. So thanks for having me, at least virtually in this nice format. Indeed, I lead the global program on nature-based solutions for climate resilience in the World Bank, together with a couple of other colleagues. And what our program is really trying to do is help our different clients, which are developing countries, and our different teams to identify nature-based solutions and then help implement them. Let me see if this works. Yeah, so maybe to start quickly, I'm actually connecting here from Panama City, where I just moved with my wife, my small daughter, to work here for the bank. And Panama City is actually one of those cities really blessed with a piece of pristine rainforest in the middle of the city. And it's 10 minutes from my house. You get there, you feel the temperature dropping, you smell the jungle smells, you hear different animals, and you feel, this is a great asset to have in your city. And we know, of course, that's not typically how our cities and our coastlines and our rivers are developing now. This is a more typical picture from Rio de Janeiro, one of the largest slums in the world. The last trees are still standing there, but most is replaced by infrastructure. And this is really what we're seeing globally, of course, as cities expand and rivers are being adjusted, coastlines are being managed, nature is being replaced by buildings, by infrastructure, and by human occupation. This is leading to several opportunities, also leading to several challenges from a climate resilience, biodiversity, and urban livelihood perspective. Cities and build-up areas are just much worse at draining water. So we have increasing flood risk in cities and in places where nature has been replaced by infrastructure. Coastlines are degrading. We have a lot of coastal erosion, coastal flooding issues like here in Mozambique. We have an increasing issue of urban heat, since buildings, infrastructure just traps much more warmth than the natural areas do. And also many of our urban residents have a lack of access to nature, which is actually important for well-being, mental well-being, as well as having no space for economic and recreational activities. So what we're trying to do, at least how we see it also at the World Bank, is trying to use nature-based solutions, often in combination with green and gray. So often it's engineering solutions together with nature-based solutions to address climate resilience challenges and bring back some of those benefits of natural environments back into cities, back into infrastructure investments. So we have been investing in nature-based solutions across the spectra of different interventions in coastal areas. We have projects looking at mangrove restoration, coral reef protection to stabilize coasts. We have city-level projects where we're developing urban parks for recreation, flood control, and these urban livelihoods. We have projects focusing on wetland restoration for biodiversity control, and also for flood management, and also in mountainous settings where we work with nature-based solutions to stabilize landslide-prone hills, for example. We see an importance in looking across these different scales when implementing NBS, and these are images from a publication we put out recently as a catalog of nature-based solutions for urban resilience, which has designs for 14 different NBS types. And in that local neighborhood level is where you have these small interventions, green roofs, retention ponds, stream renaturation, urban farming. Zooming out to that larger landscape level, there we are implementing nature-based solutions like these mangroves, artificial reefs, upland forests. And what the trick is, one of the important things is to think about those different scales, because what we're doing at upland forest management, of course, affects the downstream water availability in cities, and the ecosystems are spanning across the different scales. So we need to think about those scales when implementing projects. Since 2012, or between 2012 and 2021, we did over 100 different projects with these nature-based solutions for climate resilience. The funding is really going up, so there's a lot of demand from our countries in these types of interventions, and there's also a lot of support from our institution behind this. The numbers for 2022 and 23 also keep rising. There's a large distribution across all of our world regions where we're implementing these solutions. A lot is happening now in Africa, a lot in Latin America, also in Asia, and it's very well spread out. So I was basically asked, or at least my interpretation was of this webinar, let's really focus on a few lessons that we learned, right? So in the last 5 minutes, probably that I have here. I'll touch upon these 3 lessons. And if you give me another 10 minutes, of course, I'll just keep going. So please don't do that. But here, the first lesson is really on the hybrid nature. So nature-based solutions are often most effective and cost-effective when we're combining the green and the gray. Like here in this river, if you're doing just a gray solution, you're providing flood protection. If you're combining the green with the gray, you can optimize flood protection, but also bring out these other benefits like urban cooling, evapotranspiration, biodiversity, and recreation for those urban residents. Evidence also suggests that this can be cost effective. So here in New York City, for example, a piece of research was done to look at what is the most effective risk reduction strategy for New York, and the gray strategy, the typical business as usual strategy, was much more expensive than the gray-green combined strategy and was offering less benefits. An example here is the Mozambique Cities and Climate Change project that we finance in Mehra, one of the harbor town in Mozambique, where we implemented both great drainage infrastructure to reduce flooding in some parts of the city, but we also financed together with Germany, the creation of one of Africa's largest urban parks, with mangroves, with recreation spaces, a place to have wedding ceremonies, and it's all designed to form a flood management function. So there's a real hybrid approach, bring the green, the gray, and the social infrastructure together under one project. Lesson 2 is to take into account really all benefits when implementing MBS, and not just the resilience benefits, but really try to quantify and map all these other different benefits that MBS can bring, and try to really understand these. So an example here is an approach we've developed for Indonesia. It's a $400 million mangrove restoration project that we are having, where the question is really, it sounds like a lot of money, but Indonesia is so huge. Where do you use this money best, and where do you focus your mangrove restoration? So we mapped not just the coastal protection benefits or that mangrove have across the coastline of Indonesia, but also looked at blue carbon, tourism, fisheries, and other benefits of these systems to map really where should we put our money to have the most social, economic, and environmental benefits, which is currently being used with the government to see how do we prioritize these investments. Another example there is a project in Sri Lanka, the Metro Colombo Urban Development Project, where the wetlands in Colombo have an important role in flood risk reduction. And in the preparation of this project, very detailed modeling was done to show what is the effect of these wetlands to mitigate flooding, how should it be best combined with drainage infrastructure. And as a result, these very important wetlands were protected, which actually hosts some amazing biodiversity. The world's smallest cat lives there, which is like a tiny little cat, very cute as well as a lot of other important species. The last lesson to mention right now is to plan and implement for and with communities. So it's of course very different to do an MBS in New York City than it is to do it here in Antananarivo, Madagascar, which is one of the poorest places that I've also worked in, where the residents living here are urban slum dwellers, where we need to very much understand what are their priorities, their issues, both in flood management, how do we protect these urban wetlands for flood mitigation, but also their key concerns on livelihoods. How do we create jobs while implementing MBS? How do we ensure that there's inclusion in doing so? So one example to mention here is the Sierra Leone urban resilience engagement that we're having in Freetown, which is the capital of Sierra Leone. It's a city very exposed to flooding, coastal flooding, erosion. And in 2017, a huge landslide happened, which you see here, when actually 1,100 people died in this landslide, and 6,000 people were affected, after which the government decided we need to change things. We'll transform Freetown into a climate resilient city. They launched what they call Freetown, the Treetown campaign, with the objective of planting trees all over the city. And the World Bank financially and technically supported this. And the amazing thing is that almost 1,000 people, local people, were hired and trained to nurture trees, to plant them, and then not just to plant them and leave them, but to grow and water them over time to take care of them. And the digital technology was developed for this. So they all got a very simple, cheap smartphone with an application that allowed them to track the location of where they planted the tree. And as the months go by, the years go by, they plant and nurture it with picture evidence, and they get paid for doing so. So it's a real great example of creating local jobs. We're trying to address some of the long-term sustainability concerns around nature-based solutions. So with that, I think my 10 minutes are probably up. So we have a website on the program, the naturebasedsolutions.org, which has a map of different projects that we're doing, as well as a library of some of our publications. Some of the illustrations that I showed are from this catalog of NBS for urban resilience. And if you have any questions or comments or would like to collaborate, we're always happy to. So here's my email address as well. Thanks, Marianne. I'll go back to you.
Thank you very much, Brenden. Well, this was a very exhaustive and comprehensive presentation on different projects in various parts of the world in urban and rural environments. And so excellent introduction. And where I will now leave the floor to Ingrid Coetzee from ICLEI Africa, who will also explain how nature-based solutions can be implemented in cities in Tanzania, I think in Malawi, if I'm not mistaken.
Thank you very much,
Ingrid.
Thank you so much. And let me just get my PowerPoint up. I hope everybody can see it. Yep. Can you see?
Yes, great. Thank you.
Okay, great. Yes, so I'm going to focus on basically one or two examples, one from Tanzania and one from Malawi. And I'm going to start with the Tanzania case study. It was work that we did in Dar es Salaam. It was funded by the ICLEI Climate Fund, and essentially it was around mainstreaming biodiversity in the city. And one of the first challenges that we identified together with the city and the various stakeholders was that although the city had a relatively long history of urban greening, and one would not think it if you look at this particular picture, the spatial allocation of open space and particularly urban greening programs had not been very strategic. There were pockets where it was very well developed, but by and large there was quite a lot of vacant land or derelict land, and there had been a real need in terms of how can they utilize the limited resources that they have. So what we did was we developed a methodology which is essentially based on the ecosystem services assessment methodology, but we did it in a way that we could use it in a city where there was limited data available, and where there were huge pressing needs in terms of competing demands on space, urban space, also challenges around informality. For example, the city didn't have an up-to-date a master plan. I think the master plan dated to the 70s, and since then the city had absolutely burst out of its seams. Many parts of the cities had no access to potable water. Roads were not clearly defined, etc., etc. And the methodology that we developed was a sort of a co-development process together with city officials, and we used planners, people from the biodiversity division, there were engineers, there were people from the sort of social services side of things as well. We also involved academics, researchers, and then community representatives from the different levels of communities right down to the tower levels, and essentially used the thinking around ecosystem-based approaches, services, and did that together with a spatial mapping exercise where we literally got everybody sitting around big maps. They were aerial photographs and maps, and identified the various ecosystem services in the city. And then also found, what were the sort of benefits of particular services, using local knowledge, but also using institutional knowledge and research, etc. So Dar es Salaam, as I said, is essentially one of these fast-growing cities, and we came up with this thematic atlas where we, together with the city and the various stakeholder groups, identified, there were, I think, about 10 or 11 different themes. These ranged, for example, from issues like water security, water quality, public health, also the issue of air quality, the need for city cooling, the need to address biodiversity loss, the need to address flood risks, etc. And essentially what we then did with this thing was come up with each of these themes and came up with a series of guidelines and policy directives that are used by the city today in order to guide their investment into urban green spaces. So for example, depending on what the particular challenges that they're dealing with, this particular one, the sort of section deals with biodiversity loss, but it also deals with issues around heat and air pollution. You can see, for example, in the map on the right-hand side, where it was tracking what the specific heat island effects were, where the heat was the worst. Sorry, I've moved on. And then showed on the left-hand side, you can see the corridors of heat, urban heat, that also follow the traffic corridors. And it was essentially to come up with practical guidance, but also policy guidelines. So this is just one example. And then a very different example was the one that we developed in Lilongwe, in this case funded by the Swedish government, specifically through Swedbio. And both of these projects are still ongoing. But what we did in Lilongwe was to come up with the urban tinkering methodology, which essentially works with informality, but then uses quite an innovative approach to coming up with various ways in which to deal with the challenges around urban planning, around finding different adaptation methodologies to ensure and to increase resilience on the one hand, but also then the whole idea of protecting ecosystems and introducing nature-based solutions, but in ways that are probably less conventional. So in this particular case study, we were looking at the Lilongwe River. It was at that stage one of the most polluted rivers in the country. And it had a whole lot of issues related to encroachment on the river banks by communities, informal communities. There were markets in and around this area, so there were issues around pollution of the water from effluent going into the river, waste going into the river. There was also huge issues around flooding because obviously the river got congested, and there were tensions between the various communities as well as the authorities. And when we got there, the situation was such that the authorities just didn't, they had no relationship with the local communities, and they'd sort of left the whole thing to get from bad to worse. So we, through this urban tinkering process, we worked together with the local communities, we worked with the authorities as well, and we came up with a range of solutions that are essentially all nature-based solutions in terms of how to clean up the area and to then on the other hand also to reconstruct and to restore the particular river. So essentially what happened there was that if you look at the next slide, where they started clearing the riverbanks, they started removing the waste, they built structures across to help with the transport of goods and people. And then there were projects around urban agriculture along the banks out of the floodplains. And essentially, it came up to the point where we developed a whole urban river revitalization plan together with the local community, using the various natural assets and restoring the ecosystems in that area, so that we got to the point where the water quality was improved, the pollution, there were ways in which the pollution could be, for example, one of the things that they did was they organized themselves into little groups, and they had a waste removal group for each of the markets along there. They've come up with plans on how to recycle their waste. A lot of the waste was organic waste, so they started a whole composting project. The composting project fed into the urban agriculture project. That again fed the markets. It created livelihoods, and there was a whole range of different initiatives and solutions that came out of that particular project. And then, of course, I think the other thing, which was one of the sort of spin-offs of this particular project, was it restored the relationship between the local community and the local authority, which had initially been quite confrontational and one of distrust as a result of this particular project, and this co-production and co-design approach that we followed in using nature-based solutions to deal with all these challenges, that essentially re-established that relationship. And I just want to end off with a slide just listing some of the lessons that we've learned. We've had several other projects. We've worked in Mozambique, we've worked in the city of Johannesburg, and some of these projects, have dealt with issues like water security. In the city of Johannesburg, we developed a catchment for a plan based on a hydrological model for managing one of the particular catchments. And we've worked in Uganda, we've worked in Kenya, etc. And we still have projects in many of those countries. And the lessons that we've learned, although the projects have been different, the level of challenge that has been encountered has been different, the system of governance is different, the loss in biodiversity, etc., all differs. The lessons are quite common. And I think one of the ones that we learned early on was that you needed to ensure that all the levels of government are involved. So you're not just focusing on the local level, but you needed to also include the subnational level of government, and very importantly, also get the buy-in and the support from the national government. Something else that is really an important factor is the issue of funding. And the use of or access to financial instruments. Many of the cities that we work in, particularly the secondary cities, the smaller cities, have a problem in the sense that they don't have the resources and the capacity to access and to come up with bankable projects, to scale up investment in nature-based solutions. And one of the things that we've also realized is that often when it comes from a city, they're very small, localized little projects instead of doing things at scale. So, we've spent a lot of time upskilling and developing skills and helping cities come up with bankable projects and giving them access to donors, etc., that would be interested in this type of work. A point that the previous speaker also made around looking at the multiple co-benefits, not just focusing on one, but certainly looking at as many of the benefits as possible. And what I want to emphasize here is the point that we address also issues of social inequality, the issues of livelihoods, potential of livelihoods. Very important, something that we're working on a lot more is the question around human rights. So this is the question, issues of access, issues of safe environments, health issues, gender-related issues, and it's something that is becoming increasingly important. Also, while I talk about this, what we realized is often that there's a wealth of knowledge, indigenous knowledge within the community that one needs to recognize and to harness that knowledge, and not just to bring in solutions that are from other parts of the world and to try and railroad those types of solutions. And then also the point around understanding that ultimately there needs to be not just a benefit in terms of addressing a particular issue, whether this is flooding or coastal erosion or the need for greater resilience or reducing disaster risks, But certainly also importantly is the fact that we need to understand that we're working here with nature and we need to protect and restore our ecosystems so that there's a biodiversity benefit that comes as well from the nature-based solutions. And then I think just one last point to say is that in many senses that we need to be aware of the fact that we should be careful that we don't bring in a nature-based solution that is essentially not fit for that particular region or area from a biodiversity perspective. We saw there were many projects where, for example, with a tree planting or an urban greening project, the wrong species had been brought in, and what that meant was that it then became an invasive species, and that led to other problems. In Cape Town, for example, there's a very interesting project where I live in a city that is water scarce. We nearly reached day zero a few years ago. And one of the solutions that have been applied subsequently has been around clearing alien vegetation in the catchment. So it's not just within the city, but in the catchment. And interesting about this is that the benefits of this in terms of improving water, not only water quantity, but also water quality, has been that it was actually found to be 10 times cheaper than the next, in terms of cost, but also in terms of the yield, the increase in yield, than sort of some of the more engineering type of solutions. And I think that I'm going to leave it at that. I'm sure that we can deal with some of the other issues during question time. And if you want my email contacts, there is my email address. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ingrid, for sharing these two important projects and also talking about all the co-benefits, social and environmental benefits that nature-based solutions can bring, and also reminding us that even if climate change is a global issue, it has a really diverse local impact, and the solution have to be actually adapted to the local issue. So that was a very interesting presentation. And now I would like to also leave the floor to Swapan Mehra from India, who will also share with us, the very critical issues that India face in terms of addressing climate change and how nature-based solutions are part of the mix of solutions. The floor is yours, Swapan.
Thank you very much. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Thank you very much. It's a real honor and privilege to be speaking here. As Marianne mentioned, I am a Harvard Kennedy School alumni, so it's especially delightful to be on this platform. I'm going to take you through our journey as an organization which has been working on developing nature-based solution projects in India, especially for more than a decade now, and trying to focus these on addressing the multiple issues of climate change, biodiversity loss, land degradation, etc. To begin with, I'll not run through all of the content on this slide, but I just want to highlight that while in the current context, one of the key drivers for investments in nature-based solutions is the need to offset a lot of emissions and to sequester carbon that's out there. There is also the huge challenge of resilience and climate risk that nature-based solutions address. This is particularly relevant in the context of countries like India, where I come from, which are highly vulnerable. Different studies rate India as the 4th or the 7th most vulnerable country to climate change, but there are pockets within the country which rank amongst the most vulnerable. It's a country where still a large number of people are directly dependent on land. Our food production is very much dependent on monsoons. Our water resources are fragile. Our energy sources are dependent on water and climatic patterns. And because we're a tropical country, we have seasons. We have very, very hot summers, very cold winters, and these are intensifying. It's estimated that if we follow the current trajectory of climate change, we are already at 1.1 degrees as per IPCC. We are expected to cross many more thresholds, unfortunately. By the end of the century, climate change could cause anywhere between 3 to 10% of India's GDP in loss, could affect our food production by 50%, could increase the rates of heat stroke and diseases astronomically. and about 50% of the country's vegetation could shift. These are trends that we've already started seeing. In recent news, there is every year there are reports on untimely floods, the losses that these floods cause, challenges in crop production, which lead to immense price surges to a level where people can't afford certain food crops, and increasing deaths from heat strokes. Given this context, India, along with the rest of the world, but India has taken a sort of a leadership role in the developing country space to take on very ambitious climate targets. The goal is not only to contribute towards emission reduction, but also to prioritize the resilience and adaptation of our ecosystems. In the nature space, we have at least 2 to 3 very major targets. We have a NDC targets submitted as part of our Paris Agreement commitment to increase our carbon sinks by 2.5 to 3 billion tons of CO2. We also have a commitment that we'll restore 26 million hectares of degraded land by 2030. About 24% of our country is already under forest cover, a remarkable performance. We've seen an increase in forest cover over the last 3 decades continuously. Then we have, at the same time, also a large amount of land under degraded areas, 90 million hectares. All of this is compounded by a huge population and its dependence on this land. While the cover of the forest is increasing, the huge pressure means that in many cases and in many areas, the quality of the forest is threatened. When the quality of the forest goes down, it means that there is a direct correlation and direct negative impact on water availability, pollination, and a host of ecosystem services. So there is a need to act, and there is a whole policy prerogative to act. In addition to all of these commitments, there is a move to kickstart new and innovative financing solutions. India is about to launch its carbon market. We are also launching a very novel scheme called the Green Credit Scheme, which will put a market value to non-carbon ecosystem services. Keeping this in light, and this being the central mission, our organization over the last 12 years has implemented close to about 190 nature-based solution projects with the focus on forest conservation, land restoration, biodiversity conservation, and allied areas. Our projects cover about 12 million hectares across the length and breadth of the country. These projects range from supporting our governments in making better plans to manage their lands, supporting the development of national and state level policies. We supported the government of India in its roadmap for that ambitious NDC goal, its roadmap for the land restoration target, leveraging financing from public and private sources, be it the Green Climate Fund, be it reprioritizing India's domestic finance through tax allocations, be it also leveraging the now very, very active carbon market for investments in the right sectors. We've supported about 8,000 government officials through training and capacity building on novel approaches of landscape conservation and carbon climate change. We've also developed India's first and at the moment only methodology for carbon accounting that's approved at Verra, the leading global standard for carbon credits, for those of you who are conversant with the whole idea of the whole space of offsets. And we've registered many carbon projects in the process of developing many more. Some examples of the work that we've done, I'm presenting just 2 or 3 of these, but very happy to talk through more. As an example, we partnered with USAID and the Indian government to develop restoration and avoiding degradation projects in 5 jurisdictions in India. We took into account the local context. We took into account challenges of pressures on land, and we suggested interventions, including interventions to reduce dependence on forests for fuel, for fodder, promoting alternate livelihoods, more active deployment of remote sensing-based assessments of real-time degradation, to be able to come up with these jurisdictional solutions that finally feed into national policy and can leverage current national financing for more effective management of the country's forests. We recognize that if we have to restore 90 million hectares of land, we need organic matter. We've been supporting biogas, we've been supporting vermicompost and biochar projects across the length and breadth of the country. One of our program leverages carbon finance to distribute such plants. We've distributed about 80,000, almost entirely funded through carbon credit sources. And then we are making a linkage between the rich organic compost that comes out of these plants with degraded lands in peri-urban areas. We are supporting a community-based organization in restoring about 4,000 hectares of degraded community land in the states of Jharkhand and Bihar at the moment, expanding this to Madhya Pradesh. The whole idea here is to plant native trees, a species called Terminalia, which is a very good, fast-growing native tree that supports a lot of biodiversity, and use these as a means of hosting silkworms for a specific kind of silk called tussar. We have a partner organization called Cognisphere Solutions Limited, which is an affiliate of one of India's largest NGOs called Pradhan. And we've been able to finance this whole project through carbon credit pre-purchases from the NatWest Group, from Climate Partner and other such buyers. We are doing a similar project of carbon-based financing for agroforestry in about 10,000 hectares of Odisha and Madhya Pradesh, areas again which have very degraded land, supporting short rotation tree cultivation, and then ensuring connectivity between the tree growers and potential consumers of trees in industry. A good source not only of carbon offsets, but also of local adaptation, improving site quality, arresting degradation. Our learning from a lot of these projects, as we've also documented in a recent report that we did, supported by the UK government and the government of India on key issues for nature-based solutions in India. I've tried to summarize some of these learnings and lessons in this slide. A lot of these have been actually already covered by my previous speakers, and it's good to understand that it's good and disconcerting to understand that we are all grappling with the same challenges and issues. So one of the things that we see is that very often, a lot of these projects, the way they are designed, we don't take into account a long-term economic benefit and long-term financing outlays to see them through their natural fruition to reach a stage where they're self-sustainable. Very often, like my previous speaker mentioned, a lot of nature-based solution projects don't take into account the right ecological context. You end up choosing species that might not be fit for the local context, that might lead to maladaptation, might not give benefits to communities. It's very critical to work at the overlap of the requirements of global frameworks, the requirements of net zeros of global corporations, the requirements of NDC goals of countries, but merge them with the expectation and requirements of the actual custodians of the land. What are those requirements? Those requirements are to diversify incomes from those sources which are highly prone to climate change. But the requirements are also to fit into the changes in consumption patterns, changes in the behavioral economy, to take into account broad policy shifts. Very often we see that a lot of these projects are implemented, but don't take into account the emanating or the evolving policy landscapes. If there is going to be a certain shift in promoting a certain kind of commodity in a region, that has to be taken into account while promoting tree cultivation, because otherwise you'll end up losing your trees in year 3, year 4, and that's a huge amount of capital wasted. There is a need to build skills, not only of communities, but also build skills of various other institutions, right from the jurisdictional managers to national policymakers, to sub-jurisdictional managers within the public sector, especially public sector in the case of our country, but also industry which is dependent on raw material from nature-based solution projects and those who have impacts on these kind of projects, to take into account this whole context, to be able to convince them to spare additional capital to allow for success versus limited capital to allow for marginal success. These are some lessons that we've learned over the years. One of the things that we are doing to internalize these lessons and to be able to implement our learnings and our key priorities on ground is that we are creating our own nature-based solution financing initiative. We call this Nature Returns. We've noticed in the last few years that there are significant inefficiencies, especially in the way the carbon market allocates capital for nature-based solutions, not prioritizing a lot of the key issues that we've spoken about earlier, and only prioritizing the cost per ton of carbon generated, and which we feel is a threat not only to the generation of those carbon assets, but all of the other factors: community resilience, biodiversity, species loss, land degradation, etc. So we are developing a blended finance instrument, a blended finance facility, which will invest significant pools of capital in different kind of nature-based solution projects in India and deliver not only carbon credits, but many other benefits that I've mentioned. The way we are structuring this is to break this into 2 facilities. One is the investment facility that uses concessionary as well as impact capital to be able to provide a bouquet of different financing approaches for different projects based on their context. Some of these projects, for example, developing a mangrove in a highly vulnerable coastal area requires a much larger investment per unit of carbon or adaptation benefit than a farm forestry project. So these contexts need to be taken into account and blended into a portfolio. We are working with various international and national partners to come up with innovative instruments like guarantees, so that we don't have to pre-sell or pre-commit a large part of a project output to international funders or national funders at low prices. We are also structuring a development facility that uses philanthropic capital to underwrite, develop, and build capacity of project owners, NGOs, community-based organizations to be able to compete in, to be able to collaborate in, and to be able to negotiate effectively contracts that suit their context and their requirement with large corporate investors. Our goal is to be able to leverage enough resources to fund at least 40 large NBS projects, which can generate close to about 200 million tons of CO2 offset and an equally large amount of benefits for communities as well as biodiversity. Our projects at the moment, we have about 33 that we have currently started diligencing and working on, are across these categories of conserving ecosystems, protection, restoring, transforming agriculture, working towards reducing agriculture emissions through fertilizer and moving towards more tree-based systems, and then energy solutions that work along with nature and support restoration, like I was mentioning earlier. This is an example of one big program that we're working on. We're also trying to prioritize large landscape approaches in which we achieve economies of scale, but we can deliver all of those co-benefits that we spoke about at scale. So we are working on restoring 150,000 hectare corridor between two national parks. This is a mosaic of degraded community wasteland of various kinds. And this landscape provides habitat to several critically endangered species. We are working on a combination of tree planting as well as grassland restoration. We've found the right kind of ground partners to oversee implementation. We've done baselines, we've done estimates, and now we're in a position to lock in initial capital to seed fund the creation of the first pilots and then pave the way for large-scale replication. And in process, providing a significant amount of CO2 offsets to interested buyers while giving all of these other benefits to our communities and governments. These are the goals of our platform. I already mentioned 200 million tons of CO2, restore at least 600,000 to 1 million hectares of land, and unlock $500 million of various kinds of capital pools, public and private, for the implementation of these projects and support at least 2.5 million vulnerable people. One of the other unique things that we are doing now is that we've noticed that one of the other critical building blocks to have successful community-based nature projects is community engagement and long-term behavior change. So we also partnered with a leading agency, a top Indian behavioral change agency, which uses design thinking tools to communicate with the entire gamut of stakeholders working on nature, be it policymakers, be it communities on the ground, or be it government officials, to understand what are the nudges that are required to move them towards the right kind of thinking, policy, non-policy, to be able to sustain and succeed in long-term implementation of these projects. Some of the tools that they're developing include gamification, games to demonstrate the negative impacts of chemicals being overly used in agriculture versus non-chemical agriculture, using theater and other such tools to showcase the long-term impacts of multiple ecosystem services, to convey the value of different ecosystem services and create the basis for understanding the idea of monetization, which is very alien to a lot of our communities. These are some of the partners that we are working with currently to build up and scale up this platform, both on the financing side, technology side, as well as community partnership side. Thank you very much. These are my contacts. Very happy to discuss more during Q&A and get in touch later.
Thank you very much, Swapan, for this very exhaustive and impressive presentation on the work you do in India on nature-based solutions. I would like to ask you if you have questions, don't hesitate to put them in the Q&A. I see one question which is actually more an offer or for a PhD, but if you have questions, don't hesitate. Actually, I have in the limited time that is left, one question for the presenters. You, especially in the last presentation, mentioned carbon credits, carbon offsets that could be linked to nature-based solutions. And in this case, it raised actually the questions of measuring, the performance and measuring actually the return on investment from this nature-based solutions. So what are the existing tools to manage and assess the performance of nature-based solutions? Brenden, would you like to start?
Thanks, Marianne. I think it's an interesting question, probably with multiple stages and multiple answers to them. I think on the carbon credit question and what is needed for an NBS project to have the right standards to be eligible for carbon financing, I'll probably pass that question to Swapan, since given the presentation, the expertise there from India. I think what we're seeing is that we use different tools and analysis types to identify nature-based solutions at various stages of the project, and then to see whether they would actually be a feasible and robust investment. So we have at the project identification phase, we have a geospatial approach that we call nature-based solutions opportunity scan, which we've now applied to 15 or 18 something projects in cities and along coastlines, where basically with basic geospatial analysis, look at what are the existing ecosystems, where is degradation going on, what are the flood risks, what are the heat risks in cities and coastlines, what types of NBS would probably be suitable to implement in this situation. And that gives you a first order estimate of, is there space for NBS? Can they be potentially useful? But it's not enough, of course. And then we need to go to sort of pre-feasibility level analysis, where you really have experts going, doing flood modeling, seeing, what is the flood risk issue here? What is the heat risk issue? What is the contribution of engineering works of drainage and pipes to reduce net flood? What could feasibly be the real performance of a wetland system or a mangrove system to reduce these risks and bring these benefits? And then finally, we need to actually go and design these to engineering standards. So one thing we're always urging for is try to not separate too much the nature-based solutions from the gray infrastructure investments. Try to be as robust as in analyzing your nature-based solutions as you do with your gray infrastructure solutions, to make sure that you put something in place that actually works and measure all those benefits. So maybe I'll leave that as my contribution here. There's much more to say, especially in the carbon question, which I think is interesting as well.
Thank you very much. Ingrid, would you like to also address this question?
Yeah, just quickly, I won't address the carbon side. I think Swapan can do that. But just from our perspective, very similar experience, looking at it very much from a spatial and ecosystem benefits perspective. But what we're doing now is, because one of the things that we found is that often we don't look at we don't measure the social impacts, the sort of gender related, those sorts of things. So we're busy developing a tool now where, and it's not complete yet, but where we look at specifically how one measures the socioeconomic impacts and the impacts in terms of the achievement of human rights, and looking specifically at issues around gender, rights of access, rights to the use of resources, etc. So those are some of the new tools that we have introduced. And then one of the other tools that we have used in the past where we've looked at the sort of economic valuation of specific ecosystem types and resources, and looked at how those have been used in developing nature-based solutions and applying nature-based solutions within a particular city context.
Thank you, Ingrid, for introducing also these tools and this actually issue of measuring the social impact. I think that's very complementary to what has been mentioned before. I have Swapan, would you like to also say a word? And I have then additional question in the chat. So please, a brief word on this question of measuring the performance of NBS.
Sure. Thank you, Marianne. So from a carbon standpoint, there is a well-established science on assessing the carbon stocks in tree systems, forest systems, using allometry, using equation sets that are developed to understand the growth rate of different trees, convert those into biomass and carbon. One of the challenges of carbon credit projects is that while you can calculate the stocks and changes in stocks, both from a perspective of loss or gain, you only get issued credits against a baseline or a reference emission level. So the challenge there is that in afforestation project, it is relatively simple because when you're planting trees and you assume that there was nothing before, or you can show through remote sensing, there is extensive use of remote sensing and geospatial analytics in this space, there was nothing, then against that baseline, whatever growth you have as part of a project is eligible to be converted into carbon credits. But when we are talking about avoided deforestation or these sort of conservation projects, it's much more difficult, it's much more controversial, because what you're doing is you are creating a scenario that in future, what you're doing is going to affect the course of action on a piece of land, that if you were not to come in and do certain measure, then this forest would be lost. And that's where there is a lot of research, a lot of questioning happening right now as to what's the best way to come up with those scenarios to show that the pressure on forest is X versus Y versus Z. I'd also very quickly, just 2 more seconds, the scope benefits, so social and biodiversity impacts of these projects are also very actively being looked at. At the moment, a lot of the standards, international standards that prescribe methodologies allow you to get add-on certification for projects that have very high social or biodiversity benefits, and that translates into higher prices and better financing for the project. So that's also very important to be linked to carbon.
Great. Thank you very much, Swapan, for all this additional information on this topic of measuring the performance and the financial performance of project. I think actually it addressed the question here on that was put in the chat on how the private sector financing can be introduced and incorporated into this project, and the need to mix public and private finance public and private financing source. We actually are coming to the end of this session. I would really like to thank our 3 speakers, outstanding speakers, for sharing with us their experience in managing, implementing nature-based solutions projects, but also sharing tools that can be actually useful for the audience. I know that we have a lot of practitioners here who are involved actually in acting on these issues. So we will share actually the presentation on our website later on. And if there has been a question, a request from a participant to have the email of the speakers. So if the speakers could share their email in the chat, that would be appreciated. Before we actually go in the networking session, I would also like to thank Naz Bacon, who has been actually instrumental in organizing this event. Thank you very much, Naz, for your support and in structuring, in reaching out also at the speakers. Okay, so now we have the possibility to stay a little longer for a networking session, and I will actually start some breakout rooms so that we can meet in small groups. And thank you very much, Ingrid, Brenden, and Swapan for being with us today.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Bye. Bye.
Great. So we will stop the